love an icebreaker. And then Martin Mijovsky is going to be speaking on neurodiversity in general. And then Zoe will speak on dyslexia, Danche will speak on ADHD, and then Marley will speak on autism. We're very excited and we hope it's as insightful for you as it was for us putting it together. So thank you. And then, I'll just speak a bit about the Birmingham Global Shapers Hub. So the Birmingham Global Shapers Hub is part of the Global Shapers community, which is an initiative of the World Economic Forum. And we represent a diverse mix of young, efficient, and passionate professionals creating solutions to the socioeconomic issues impacting Greater Birmingham and the Midlands. Renata, did you want to speak about the Skopje Hub?
Yeah, sure. So the Skopje Shapers Hub is a network, and right now we have like around 40 members that are from 18 plus to 30. So we are just such a diverse group with different experts in different fields. As Yomi already mentioned, this is an initiative from the World Economic Forum. We are part of the Global Shapers community and have developed different project initiatives in our hub. One of them is the No Health Without Mental Health that we started during the pandemic, and we organized a lot of webinars on these topics together with psychologists and psychotherapists in our countries. And we saw that it has like a very big interest in the public. And so for this reason, we decided to make a collaboration with other hub and right now to talk a little bit on different topics such as understanding neurodiversity, where we can also engage the Macedonian community with the community in UK. And I hope that we will inspire motivation in you and that we will just continue with this cooperation in the future. Thank you, Yomi.
Thank you. Thank you. I wish I said more about the Birmingham Hub now, but I'm very time conscious, but I'm very happy to be doing the collaboration with the Skopje Hub in Macedonia. I also wanted to say a big thank you to Ratchet, who is in the Freiburg Hub, because they were very helpful in putting this together and helping us, plan it. So thank you. And yes, so let's meet the speakers. We have 4 speakers this evening. Martin is a psychotherapist and a neuroscientist. Zoe Jane is a sports therapist and dyslexia advocate. Danche is a psychologist and is currently studying for an MSc in psychology. And Marley is a senior email marketing officer at the Samaritans and is a neurodiversity advocate. Ignore the spelling mistake. And then, so like following up from what Renata said, we picked the topic understanding neurodiversity because there's usually stigma, a lack of awareness, and a lack of appropriate infrastructure, which causes exclusion of people with neurodevelopmental differences. And we thought that it was important to bring neurodiversity from the, British perspective and also the Macedonian perspective together to help people understand and embrace neurodiversity in communities, schools, healthcare settings, and workplaces to improve inclusivity for all people. And it's important for us to create an environment that is conducive to neurodiversity and recognize, where am I? Sorry, I absolutely can't find my screen. Sorry, everyone. I'm not quite sure what's going. Can everyone see my screen?
Yeah, we see it.
Yes, Yomi.
And you can see me?
Yeah, we see you.
Yeah.
Here we have the screen.
I can't see myself or the screen. Sorry, let me just.
If you want, you can just turn off and just turn on again. No worries.
Okay. Great. I will just. Okay, can everybody see my screen? Great, and me?
Yes, Yomi.
Great. So for us, both the Skopje hub and then the Birmingham hub, we thought it was important for us to foster an environment through conversations that was conducive to neurodiversity and to recognize and emphasize each person's individual strengths and talents while also providing support for their differences and needs, which is why we picked this topic to discuss this evening. And then, yeah, icebreaker session. So in the comments, really quickly, in the next 2 minutes, can everybody type in what they will do if they had an extra hour every day? I'm just kind of like curious to see like what everybody would get up to with their spare time. Okay, we have quite a few responses. Renata, did you want to pick up on that? Because I can't see the comments.
Sure, yeah, definitely.
Sharing the screen.
We have a lot of comments, and yeah, I would say that most of them are actually connected with our topic today. So if they have 1 hour more, they would like sleep, workout, swim, run, read more books, self-care, read more, take a walk, sleep, take a walk, self-care, do things with my kids, read more, sleep, gardening. Yeah, that's great.
Oh, nice.
Oh, we have one comment. So jealous of these walkers and runners. Finish one with many half-read books on my reading list. I would like to go for a run and relax in the nature. Yes. So I would recommend you to implement this 1 hour in our 24 hours. So to try to be more effective and to do our stuff. Great.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for your comments and engagement. So we can go on to the next slide.
Great. So now we're going to have Martin speak with us about neurodiversity. And Martin is a neuroscientist and a psychotherapist. So he's going to be giving us some more insights on neurodiversity, especially for beginners, for people who don't understand it, who have never had an experience or who are just curious about learning, or people who want to learn more.
Okay. First, good evening, everybody. Thank you for having me here. It's a pleasure to be here tonight and to talk to such a lovely people and for such a lovely topic. So I hope you can all hear me. Okay.
Yes, we can hear.
Okay. Okay. For a moment, I thought I was just moving my lips around. No. Okay. So neurodiversity, the icebreaker, the most controversial topic tonight. So thank you for that honor. And let me start. But first, neurodiversity, as maybe some of you know, is a somewhat controversial topic. And I will try to explain it from the both ways. This is not my personal opinion about it. It's just what the theory and the academics and the sciences have for now have told us about the neurodiversity. Basically, neurodiversity describes the idea that people experience and interact with the world around them in many different ways. There is no one right way of thinking, no one right way of learning, behaving, and those differences should not be viewed as deficits. The word neurodiversity refers to the diversity of all people in general, but most commonly is used in the context of autism spectrum disorder, ASD, as well as other.
Martin, you're muted.
Can't hear you.
Martin, you're muted, I think.
I don't know why that happened. I don't know when did you lose me. I was talking that neurodiversity refers to the diversity of all people, but it's often used in the context of autism spectrum disorder, as well as other neurological or developmental conditions such as ADHD or many other learning disabilities and so on. The neurodiversity movement emerged during the late 1990s, aiming to increase the acceptance and inclusion of all people while embracing neurological differences. Maybe some of you are familiar with it. Judy Singer, an Australian sociologist, coined the term neurodiversity in her article published in 1999, I think it was, titled, "Why Can't You Be Normal Once in Your Life?" She did it in order to promote equality and inclusion of, as she called them, neurological minorities. I won't talk about autism spectrum disorder because other speakers tonight will do that, but I just need to give a little intro. Autism spectrum disorder is associated with differences in communication, learning, and behavior, though it can look different from person to person, as we are all different in everything that we do. Additionally, for some people with autism, differences may not cause suffering to the person themselves, but instead the suffering may result from the barriers imposed by the society, the norms, therefore causing social exclusion and inequity. Medical evaluation and treatment is important for individuals with ASD. For example, establishing a formal diagnosis may enable access to social and medical services if needed for that individual. Diagnostic explanation may help the individual or their family understand their differences better and enable community connections. Additionally, neurodevelopmental condition may also be associated with other health issues that require extra monitoring or treatment. It is important that people who need and desire these interventions to promote communication, social, academic, or daily living skills to have access to those services in order to maximize their quality of life and developmental potential. However, this is a very important. Approaches to interventions cannot and should not be one size fits all. As mentioned before, all individuals are different, unique, and have different goals, desires, and needs. So let's get back to the neurodiversity. As an approach that argues diverse neurological conditions are the result of normal variations in the human genome. This portmanteau, let's call it, from neurology and diversity, originated in the late 1990s, as we mentioned with Judy Singer, as a challenge to prevail views of neurological diversity as inherently pathological. Instead, asserting those neurological differences and like they should be recognized as respected and like social categories on par with other social categories like gender, ethnicity, sexual orientation, or disability status. Neurodiversity asserts that some features usually described as illnesses are in fact only atypical or neurodivergent, meaning that they result from a specific neurological wiring in the brain. Therefore, it is merely a, let's say, human difference that must be respected like any other such difference. And such individuals are neurologically diversive or neuroatypical. According to some activists, I think this is fair enough to say, if neurodiversity is considered a disease, then neurotypicality should be considered a disease too. Neurotypical individuals often assume that their experience of the world is either the only one or the correct one. Neurotypical individuals are often intolerant. This is sadly, but this is true. They're often intolerant or of seemingly minor differences in others. I think it was the National Symposium of Neurodiversity in 2011 held at the Syracuse University in the United States that defined neurodiversity as the diversity of human brains and minds, the infinite variation in neurocognitive functioning within our species. It's a concept where neurological differences are to be recognized and respected as any other human variation. These differences can include those labeled with dyspraxia, dyslexia, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, dyscalculia, autism spectrum, Tourette syndrome, and many others. The emergence of the term neurodiversity and the corresponding movement that began during the late 1990s should be analyzed from a broad perspective that on one hand, it should include the history of disability movements, and on the other, should absorb the growing impact of neuroscientific knowledge and practices of the cultural imaginary. The neurodiversity movement is historically connected to a shift away from psychoanalysis or psychoanalytical theories and toward a neurobiological and genetic understanding of autism. For example, I think you are all familiar, but in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, and even in the mid 1970s, psychoanalytical explanations were paramount, both in psychiatric theory and clinical practice. And such a shift went hand in hand with the emergence of pro-cure and anti-cure discourses expressed by neurodiversity advocate groups and parent and practitioner groups that favored the search for and use of behavioral and psychopharmacological therapies. Now I will talk briefly about the both movements seen in the neurodiversity discourses. That's important for us right now. The growth of self-advocacy movements and their enhanced exposure in the media have intensified political clash between autistic and pro-cure activists. One of the most controversial issues in this field is the so-called analytical behavior, applied behavioral analysis, ABA. That's a type of a cognitive therapy protocol that for many parents is the only therapy that leads autistic children to make some progress in the form of establishing visual contact, performing limited cognitive skills, and so on. But for autism activists, ABA represses autistics' natural or authentic modes of expression. The main critique is that those techniques are cruel, unhuman, and so on. And the advocates claim that autism is not an illness that we should attempt to cure it, and it violates against rights, may therefore provide a legal backing for refusing to subsidize the therapy. Such circumstances significantly increase the intensity of the debate. To those to whom autism is a disease primarily caused by genetic and neurobiological factors, the anti-cure and the pro-neurodiversity positions not only contradict their claims, but also insult the suffering of patients and their families. For the most extreme neurodiversity advocates, the search for therapies illustrates denial and intolerance towards differences, as well as the promotion of eugenic and genocidal policies. Temple Grandin, I hope I pronounce her correctly. She's a high functional autistic person who provided the title for the best-selling Oliver Sacks book, An Anthropologist on Mars. I don't know if you guys have read it. It's an excellent book. I highly recommend it. The title is a reflection how she felt around neurotypicals. She's also a prominent self-advocate, and she's not against medication. Her standpoint is not against medication, though this applies mainly to secondary symptoms such as anxiety and not to the autism itself. Judy Singer, that we mentioned her before, also argues that remedies are acceptable as long as they aim to relieve suffering and not change the patient's personalities. Thus, some self-advocates have a pragmatic attitude toward medical interventions while insisting that autism itself is not to be treated. I don't know why my background is so blurry, give me headache.
Martin.
Yeah.
You have about 1 more minute to go.
Okay, let me just finish. Many organizations in fund, their mission is to bring forth a different and positive view about autism to the public in order to create tolerance and acceptance in the community and to empower parents of autistic people or with people with different neurological conditions. Emphasis is not on soliciting funds for the cure of the autism or the other neurological, I don't know, disability or condition, but to see that autism is not a tragic epidemic, is not something that is danger for the society. In short, let me just finish here. Neither all parents oppose self-advocacy movements, nor all autistic adults favor neurodiversity. The latter sometimes find it difficult to combine their identities as autistic with the autistic communities and their identities with the neurotypical world. And this tension can become an important source of anxiety and suffering. It is known that many autistic adults do want to be cured, but they seem to represent a largely silent population. This is not a rule, not just a theory, but the high functioning autistic people are in fact pro neurodiversity, while the low functioning autistic generally hold the opposite position. Last sentence. To summarize, this biosocial field of neurodiversity seems to be extremely polarized at first glance, but under closer inspection, it appears to be more complex and provides room for a variety of nuanced positions per se. It is therefore more appropriate to characterize it as including discourses, individuals and groups that, while conflicting in some respects, may in other overlap or even support each other, rather than to simplify it as a clash of homogeneous groups that hold antagonistic positions.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. We're very conscious of the time this evening. Thank you so much for giving like a background to neurodiversity and explaining how it presents and, you know, showing us the nuances between neurodiversity and neurotypicals. That was very insightful. Thank you very much. Next, we will have Zoe, who will be talking about dyslexia. So that's very exciting. Zoe is a sports therapist and she's a dyslexia advocate, and she likes to bring awareness to dyslexia and help people understand what it means to be dyslexic and the journey. So I'm going to share Zoe's slides.
Amazing, thank you so much. Great, so am I okay to just take it away?
Yeah, go on.
Amazing, good evening everyone. Lovely to see you all. My name is Zoe and proud dyslexic, and I'm just here to talk to you about dyslexia on a whole, what it is, and my journey. So next slide, please. So As a dyslexic person, I love an agenda. I always need to know what's happening next. It just makes my brain work much better. So a few points I'm going to go through is who I am, what is dyslexia, my journey so far, and then closing statement. So let's go right into it. Who am I? So like I said, hi, my name's Zoe. I'm a 24-year-old dyslexic, proud dyslexic person on a journey really to figure out what dyslexia is to me and what it is on a whole, what makes our brains tick the way they tick. And I started this journey on like literally during COVID, because as we'll get along further down in my journey, there came a point where I was fed up of just being told, oh, you're dyslexic, you're dyslexic. What is dyslexia? I did not have a clue. So that is me, who I am. And I like to always mention two of the things that really gave me relief when I was younger and growing up. So as a dyslexic person, and we've all touched on it, we are very creative people. We do things that always baffle me. We're always thinking about the next steps. And for me, growing up, the two things I was really good at was dancing and sports. In school, let's just say academics was not for me, and that is fine. And I excelled so much in playing sport, and that is what gave me a passion to carry on, and I've always continued it. So it's always nice to mention when I talk about who I am, that these are two things I'm very passionate about and actually helped me in the journey that I'm on today. So the next slide will be, what is dyslexia? To be honest, still learning. It's an ever-growing process. And the way I see it and the way I break it down is as follows. To start off with, it is a neurological condition. So it's all about the brain. It's all about how we actually process words and language and information. Therefore, a lot of the signs of dyslexia is like poor spelling, pronouncing words, actually processing information. So for me personally, spelling was not it, was not me. Don't ask me to spell anything. I'm a voice note type of girl, because that is actually what helps me. And it makes sense. Since the dyslexia is all about how we process things, for me, it made sense why my spelling wasn't always there. Same with pronouncing words. In school, you learn how to do phonics. And as a dyslexic person, phonics, it can be very difficult. So the fact that it is all about how we process information is one of the core aspects to dyslexia. And it's not always, yes, I've touched on the spelling and the pronouncing, but there's a lot to dyslexia as well. It's not just that. It's when it comes to directions, I get very baffled about directions sometimes. And there's a lot of other things that come with dyslexia other than just the spelling and the writing. And it's always a good one to actually mention that here in the UK, it affects 1 in 10 people. And that's what we believe. There's a lot of people out there that aren't diagnosed. So it's a real big thing here. And that is why I've got that picture on the right-hand side that says dyslexia is real, it's common, and it's lifelong. I have been through so many situations where people are like, oh, Zoe, has your dyslexia disappeared because you've got a degree? Oh, Zoe, I didn't know dyslexia was this, that, and the other, or you don't look dyslexic. And these are stereotypes that throughout my journey were constantly breaking down, because it is a hidden disability. And when it is hidden, as it is, you can't see that someone has dyslexia. That's why we're all about actually talking about what it is. So then if we go to the next slide, please. So one thing I always like to mention to people is everyone's dyslexia is different and will present in many different ways. This is because for myself, I have conversations with so many other dyslexic people, and there's so many things we share, but there's things that's different. Like we share having these random conversations where we'll talk about, for example, 3 different topics, but we'll bounce between the 3. We'll start with 1, then we'll go to 3, then we'll go to 2, then we go back to 1. That's just something how our brains work. For some people like myself, I speak and listen to things on double the speed. It's just how my brain works. But it's good to know that it is different. There are a lot of dyslexic people out there that are really good with English. I think there's this misconception that dyslexics aren't good with writing. I'm one of them. Doesn't float my boat. However, there's so many talented dyslexic people out there where English was one of their escapes. It was one of their best things. For me, I was one of those dyslexic people where you'll have a thought, I'll have an amazing thought, I'll be in my English class thinking of the next best-selling book, but it does not translate on paper. There's that disconnect between how I process things and get it on paper. So it's always good to know it's different for everyone. And that is why if you go to the next slide, this is my example of how it is different. Go back, please, to the green one there. This is actually how my screen pretty much looks 90% of the time. This is not a common, let's say, sign for dyslexic people. Not all dyslexic people will need an overlay or a visual aid. However, I do fall into that boat. For me, I have to have my screen like this sometimes, because if I don't, I will get the words moving around a bit, and it just helps me to focus, because when I look at a background that is just black and white, it can be quite a lot and it can be quite harsh. So I actually use visual aids in helping me, but it's good to know that that's not for everyone. Yeah, this is what I mean. It can be very soothing. It all just depends. There's different colors. Your most common are green, blue, and red, but it's different for everyone. So that's why I wanted to say it may present like this, but it may present like that. So thank you. You can go to the next slide. So my journey so far, I'm going to briefly talk you about how I got from A. So let's say I'm on E in the alphabet. I've got a long way to go. So everything for me started when I was in year 6. I was in my little daydreaming self, because that's what I did. And I had a supply teacher come in that day, and she was working with me, and she was picking up on signs. She was picking up on the spelling, my B's and D's being the opposite way, my P's, my Q's. She started to talk to me about, am I dyslexic? She was asking questions like, is my mom dyslexic? Because dyslexia does actually run in families, and fun fact, she is. And that is where it all started. She started to ask me questions, and we came to the realization that I could very well be dyslexic. And then going through secondary school, we always knew something was there. We knew it was more likely dyslexia, but never got that actual diagnosis until university. And this is quite a common fact for most people in the dyslexic realm. If you talk to a lot of them, a lot of us didn't get that official diagnosis until university, which was the same for me, which was amazing. However, it's that same question, what is dyslexia? I still had no idea what it was. Yes, it was amazing to know what what was wrong, because then, and it's double-edged sword, I'd sometimes use it as an excuse, like, oh, I can't do it because I'm dyslexic, but I knew there was actually something there. I wasn't just what people would say, silly, stupid. There was something there. And that's what actually led me to the journey to start beginning. Like I mentioned, during COVID, I was sitting down like pretty much everyone thinking, what am I going to do with myself? Then I was like, well, what is dyslexia? I need to actually get a better understanding. That's when I started doing my own research. I learned more about the neurodiverse space. So you've got neurodivergent people who are people like myself, who are dyslexic, ADHD, autistic, and a massive umbrella. Then I think like the other speaker mentioned, then you've got neurotypical people. And it was really like this process of understanding what it is, so I could truly understand myself and fall into a path and a career that suits my needs, which then led me on to working full-time. I now work full-time. I do a lot of public speaking, which for a dyslexic person can be challenging, and it is, and it's scary, but it's good to push yourself out your comfort zone. And I think it's good to talk about what it's like being dyslexic and in a working environment. I work in an open plan office, which before I was fine with. Now it is getting a bit difficult. I have my noise cancelling headphones, as these are things that help me to concentrate. I always sit in the same spot, same routine, I eat the same time, and it's good to shed a light, and will be something I'd look to doing in the future about what working full-time actually looks like. So then if I take us to the very last slide, which before I even get talking about this slide, I just want to say thank you so much for actually having me here today to talk about what dyslexia is. I know we're all here, we're all advocates, we're all in the field to bring awareness about what dyslexia, autism, ADHD, dyspraxia, what it all is about. But I actually wanted to end my slides talking about what dyslexia is not, because I think it's very important we break down the stereotypes that are involved with it. So for me, dyslexia is not a problem with intelligence. Like I've mentioned, growing up for me, I was called everything under the sun because I couldn't spell. Little does it have anything to do with intelligence. That was just my flaw, but it's got nothing to do with it. It's not a problem with vision. So granted, I do fall in that little section where we use visual overlays, but that's not like a core element to dyslexia. It's just certain people. Again, it's got to do with more about understanding sound, words, and how we actually process language. Then the last one, and probably for me, the most important one, is that dyslexia has nothing to do with laziness. I sometimes may look through you, but I'm truly focusing on what you're saying and giving my brain enough time to process that information, because that's what it is. It's all about the processing. In school, I was told I was lazy, I daydreamed, I was rude, and purely it all just comes down to that is how I process everything that's happening. So those are my 3 things I wanted to leave us off with. Dyslexia is amazing. There's so much to it. It's an ever-going journey, but there's things that we need to remember to help break down the barriers, and the intelligence and laziness is 2 of the biggest ones. So I think that wraps me up. Thank you so much for listening. If you do have questions, whenever it's time for Q&As, we can definitely shout them out. I'm here all day. But yeah, thank you so much for listening to my presentation about me and dyslexia.
Thank you so much, Zoe. It was very interesting to follow you and to hear your own experience. So the next speaker that we have is Renata. She has her experience in clinical psychology. She's right now studying it. So let's hear more about her topic. Just first to ask, are you able to share your presentation, or you wanna we to share for you?
Hello?
Yeah, we hear you.
So do I share the presentation?
Yeah, if you can share it. I think that we have this
Yeah.
option. Yes.
Or if you can't, I'm happy to share it.
Yeah, can you please share it for me? Because I'm having a bit of trouble with my computer today.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
That's
I
cool.
can share it right now, and you can just tell me like how you will go with the presentation, and I will just move on this way with the slides.
Renata, are you sharing it?
Yeah, I will share it right now.
Okay.
I mean, if it's not a problem, if you already have it, or you can, because I'm just waiting to turn on the PDF.
I'm waiting for it to load to my personal.
Okay, just a minute. By the way, while we are waiting, if you have some questions or you wanna specify for some of these topics, you can also write them in the chat. So after, when we will finish with our speakers, we will have session of Q&A, so you can just share them there, and we will have time to clarify that. Okay, here we go with the presentation.
Okay. I'm sharing it. Can everybody see it?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yes, Yomi.
Yeah, Danche, please go on.
Okay, so hi everyone. My name is Danche. I will be talking about the ADHD. I am a master's student for clinical psychology and counseling. So for starters, why don't we just imagine what we think an ADHD, the person with an ADHD is, and how they behave, maybe their age, maybe their gender, and you can share it in the chat, or you can just imagine it, what you think it looks like. And after that, we can go to the next slide and see the definition. Maybe we can go to the next slide.
Hold on, please.
Yeah. In the meantime, I'll just note that there are two main manuals that we use for usually younger children that we use to diagnose, and that is the International Classification of Diseases, or the ICD, that is the 11th revision, or the Diagnostic and Statistic Manual of Mental Disorders, or the DSM-5. So before the newest revisions, the ADHD wasn't really coherent in the two manuals. Now it's a bit more coherent. First of all, they both use the term ADHD, which is great. Before in the ICD, it was hyperkinetic disorder, while the DSM, like long time ago, it was ADD, or attention deficit disorder. So I'm sure we all know what ADHD stands for. It's attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And I think some people commented what every gender, race, and race. And so there are a few conditions that needs to be met in order for the diagnosis to be given. So first of all, these symptoms need to last at least for 6 months in a persistent pattern, and they can be like there are 3 types, and they need to have direct negative impact on academia or occupational or social functioning. Depends on the person's age. And the symptoms, yes, it's usually, it's not usually, but it's a disorder that begins in childhood. That doesn't mean that it cannot be diagnosed later on in adulthood, but they need to somehow connect the symptoms with symptoms that occurred prior to age 12, whether maybe with school reports, or maybe through interviews of people that were around the person during that time, like parents. And the symptoms must be evident across multiple situations and settings. For example, they need to be evident like in school and at home, or with friends and with parents. This is because we need to kind of know that it is ADHD and not something else. For example, sometimes, like let's say a divorce between the parents can sometimes make the symptoms seem like ADHD, but it can happen. For example, they are only seen at home, and then the child goes to school and there are no symptoms, so that cannot be ADHD. So they must be evident across multiple situations or settings. And of course, like the 2 last I just mentioned, that the symptoms are not better accounted by another mental disorder, or they're not effects of a substance abuse or medication or another disease of a nervous system. So can we go to the next slide? Like I said, depending on the systems, there are 3 types of ADHD, and there is a presentation of ADHD that is predominantly inattentive, predominantly hyperactive impulsive, or combined. So the inattentive is difficulty sustaining attention, easily distracted. They are quite, like people can say, well, those 2 are pretty much the same, but actually to be distracted is from external stimuli, while difficulty sustaining attention is from internal. Forgetful, they forget deadlines, they forget and lose things. Difficulty in planning, difficulty in organization, and lacking attention to detail. While the hyperactive impulsive side is excessive motor activity. For example, children would just get up out of the seat when they're not supposed to, or they would just run a circle around in the classroom, or just do a circle, or they would fidget. However, some of the symptoms that are seen in childhood are a bit different in adulthood. So, for example, the hyperactive side, the symptoms one diminish, and second, they kind of internalize. So instead of actually getting up from the seat, someone would just be uncomfortable being seated, and then they do impulsive decisions. They can drive recklessly, or people with ADHD are prone to more accidents. So that is a result of the impulsive decisions, difficulty waiting in turn, whether it's in conversation or in games or something that their turns, and difficulty being quiet, and then they would interrupt other people's conversation, and they would comment, like necessarily at work, they would talk too much and stuff like that. And then there is combined, where there is not, like, there isn't predominantly one side or the other, but they're both equal. The next we'll talk about is the cause. The cause of ADHD is quite still unknown. The thing that we do know, that is everywhere in all manuals, and there are a lot of studies, is that there is a genetic factor. And in this particular study, there is even a percentage, and they found out that 50% of children whose parents have been diagnosed with ADHD are more likely to develop the disorder. And while the risk among siblings is 33%. However, there are other risk factors as well, like brain damage during in the womb, or low birth rate, or premature delivery, and also some that are just in the CDC, or some that it's from the NHS. And some of these, for example, alcohol and tobacco using during pregnancy, they're quite old studies, so we do not know if that is still the case. There was also, it was believed that, for example, consuming sugar or some food additives would lead to development of the ADHD, which turns out to not be true. So there is still a lot to be discovered, a lot to be researched around ADHD. And next we would go for the treatment. So one is medication. Usually psychological treatments come before medication, and whether a person would even go to the route of medication, it depends on the severity of the disorder. So I would not, I'm not really educated enough to talk about the medication. That is the side of psychiatry. So, but the psychological treatments can be psychoeducation, use of supportive groups, skill training, cognitive behavioral therapy, coaching and counseling, time management, stress management. So, for example, people would help them break down tasks. They would be told to just give themselves more time than they think a task would take. To make shorter to-do lists, and to really, for example, put a deadline on decision making as well. And yes, so the last slide is a bit of statistics. So it is thought that the global prevalence is 2 to 7%, or around 5 on average. And further 5% is just under the threshold to meet full diagnostic criteria. So these are people who do not meet the full criteria, but they're quite close to it. Then the prevalence of persistent adulthood ADHD is 2.58. So it is around 65% of people that have ADHD in childhood, they will still have it in adulthood. Then the next one is the comorbidity, or the existence of another disorder along with ADHD. So this is from the CDC. So it's a statistic from the US. For example, 33% had also anxiety, 17% had depression, 14% had autism, and 1% had Tourette's syndrome. The next one is regarding sex. So this, I was quite, I wasn't sure if I should add this one, because the studies are a bit older when it comes to this one, because the one I'm citing here is actually a book, but the prevalence in ADHD used to be more in males than females. However, males show greater comorbidity with external problems, and they used to show that they had more hyperactivity and impulsivity, while the females had internalizing problems, or a bit more problems with attentiveness. So a lot of people criticized that the ADHD is more common in males than females, because if you see a student that is, for example, makes a circle around the class and is just disruptive, of course you're gonna notice it more than if there is a student who simply space out and looking at the book, but their eyes are not moving and they're not actually reading. So that will be a lot harder to notice. Another thing is that younger children from families with a low socioeconomic status are more likely to exhibit ADHD symptoms. But another study says that there may influence the severity of ADHD symptoms. Some of you may be interested to know about the prevalence regarding race and ethnicity. However, the studies were too contradictory for me to just be able to put a study and a number on it. So yeah, I think this is pretty like a general knowledge for ADHD.
Great, Dante. Thank you very much for your presentation. I really enjoyed. I hope also that our participants enjoyed, and of course, feel free if you have some questions, just write them in the chat, and after that we can answer it. And we are going with our last speaker, who is Marley Rollins, and we will talk more about this topic. She is a senior email marketing officer and also neurodiversity advocate. If she's here, I will just suggest to turn on her camera. Hi, how are you?
Hi, I'm good, thank you. Yeah, I thought I'm not quite the expert that everyone else is, so I thought maybe it would be easy to give kind of my perspective on being autistic, and also maybe share some kind of tips that I found helpful for kind of having success in my career, and maybe kind of just day-to-day kind of things like being a manager and kind of working with people effectively. So if you want to go to the next slide. I think so yeah, my name's Marley. I only found out that I was autistic in 2020. I had quite a long struggle with my mental health. I always felt like there was kind of something wrong with me and I wasn't really sure what it was. And I went to the doctor a lot and I had like a lot of labels, basically any personality or mental illness I was assigned at some point, and nothing felt like it particularly fit really well, and I never seemed to kind of improve with medication or feel any better. And I kind of felt really lost with like who I was and why I acted certain ways. Until 2020, I finally found out that I was autistic, which was kind of a really big milestone for me. It was something that had kind of come up in my childhood a lot and maybe just never been kind of explored properly. I know we already had a little brief talk on neurodiversity, but just as like a little refresh, autism spectrum disorder affects like around 1% of the population. Most often men get diagnosed rather than women, because women tend to be better at kind of masking and kind of hiding the symptoms of autism a little bit better. Basically, it's like a developmental disability, and you have problems with kind of socializing, making friends, your speech and your language sometimes, depending on kind of how high functioning you are, or like for like higher support and lower support rather than like functioning. But yeah, and you have things like obsessive interests and kind of hyperfixation on your work, and like a lot of development issues in childhood and problems with kind of social situations and stuff like that. Then next slide, please. So yeah, basically for a long time, I thought that I probably wouldn't be able to hold down an adult job. Like I found it very, very difficult, kind of clocking in when I needed to, being on time, doing things in a certain order, making friends, and like having chats in the office was really hard for me because I just didn't understand the etiquette and I just wasn't very good at it. So I started in marketing in 2017. I worked at like a little printer company, which was far too late in the decade to have a printer company in 2017. But yeah, and I really, really struggled with it. It was a very small, close-knit office, and I just couldn't really cope with it, having to feel like I was always on all the time. So I kind of gave up on, and I thought that I'd never be able to have a normal job. And I went back to bartending, and eventually I got a marketing internship and made my way up to email marketing lead at the Samaritans. And now I've kind of went freelance on the side as well, doing like a marketing consultancy. So I guess kind of why I wanted to share this was that like there was a long time where I felt like I would definitely not have an adult job and that I just couldn't function. And there was like nothing particularly that I was good at, because everything that I could do, my kind of other problems and struggles got in the way. But I did eventually kind of find something that I could be kind of capable at. Next slide, please. So what I've kind of learned along the way is like, these are my biggest lessons so far. And these are kind of things that I've picked up through kind of having issues at work, and then kind of finding a place that I feel really comfortable, and then being able to feel like I fit in and I'm a little bit more kind of accepted. So I found that in the beginning, when I had a lot of issues and I just found out that I was autistic, I would be really, really scared to kind of not mention it and not bring it up, because I was kind of ashamed of it, and I didn't want businesses that I was kind of going for jobs for to know that I was autistic. But what I've found is kind of the biggest lesson for me is that you should never be scared to question a company's culture and the EDI initiatives before you join. Now, whenever I have an interview or I'm going to work with someone, I kind of make a point of asking, like, what do you do to support mental health and well-being? What initiatives do you have in place to support people with neurodiversity? What kind of training and self-development and flexibility and all of that kind of stuff do you offer? And I also found that honest and effective communication was really important. Again, I really tried to kind of hide being autistic, and I'd have a lot of challenges, and a lot of people would kind of tell me that I was kind of standoffish or reserved or a bit rude, or like couldn't hold eye contact very well, not very friendly, all this kind of stuff, which I knew was because I was autistic, but maybe that I was kind of scared to share that. But what I've found now is just that I just try and lead with honesty. Like I tell everyone at work that I'm autistic when I'm comfortable with the people. And I feel like in the beginning, I didn't want to be labeled by it, but actually in a supportive environment, it really helps people to understand why you act in a certain way or why you think in a certain way. And I think it is really important, and it just takes such a weight off your shoulders as well to feel like you can be yourself and bring your actual self to work. And I found that, again, like being open about my struggles wasn't really a weakness like I used to think it was. Back in previous roles, I'd found jobs, I'd feel like pressure to be like always on and 100% and never say if I was having a bad day, and never say if like I had burnout or I was kind of having a panic attack or something like that. But I've just found that now I'm in an environment where I try and kind of be open about everything that I'm struggling with, and it isn't a weakness. It's really a strength, because people know that you're kind of wholly yourself and they completely understand and they're really supportive. I found that now that I'm a manager, I try and be really open about if I'm having a bad day, so that my junior can really feel safe and like trusted to tell me if she's having a bad day too, because I feel like it takes such a mental toll on you to have to pretend that you're like 100% all the time when you're neurodiverse, and because you're just not always going to be. In fact, you very rarely are, in my experience, like depending on what is happening in my life and little factors and the smallest weird stuff that can like trigger you. And I found that setting effective boundaries was really crucial. And this is something that I really struggled with, because I kind of tend to hyperfixate on my work. So I'll work till like midnight and I can't stop working until I like finish the thing that I'm doing. Or the alternative is like, I'll try and do like 9 million things at once and I just can't focus at all and I get nothing done. So now I found like the biggest thing for me is being really, really kind of brutal with my time, and being like, I sign in at this time and I sign out at this time, and I take all of my breaks, and like really enforcing my boundaries, because I can't really manage my own boundaries very well if I don't do that. And I think I try, because I know I struggle with that, I'll try and be like too much of a people pleaser and then go the opposite way where I have no boundaries. But ultimately, I think the right place will accept you regardless. Like I've had a lot of companies where I've just felt like not normal and weird, but I finally found somewhere where whatever you've got going on, like they just embrace it. And I think that is one of the biggest things, is if you don't feel normal or you feel like you don't fit in, a lot of the time it is a culture thing, and the place is not actually doing anything to support you. And next slide, please. So because I've had kind of these challenges, some of my biggest issues have been kind of dealing with imposter syndrome because of it. But I've found that this is like just a little kind of lesson to myself that I try and tell myself when I feel like I really can't do this job, and like being autistic means that I'll never actually be good at these things. So I just try and tell myself that like if I'm scared of messing something up, that it shows that I'm obviously invested and I'm interested in doing a good job. And if I've been asked to do it, then they also trust that I've been given that I've done a good job. And people are going to be way nicer and more supportive than you're imagining. Like in my head, I'd always be like, oh, I'll make one mistake and these people will just absolutely like torture me, like they'll just tear me apart, which just never happens. Like unless you're on a conversation with like your mortal enemy, which I don't know who has a mortal enemy, it just won't happen. And also there's just way worse people than you out there in the world who like are going for it with no imposter syndrome, and they're like totally unqualified to do stuff, like politicians and male podcast hosts. So I think like don't let it hold you back, even if it's something that like really, really drains you and plagues you quite a lot. Next slide, please. Sorry, I know my slides are really stupidly organized, so it's not working very well. So yeah, what I found to be an effective kind of manager is that I try and lead by example with transparency. So if I'm having a rubbish day or I need to take a break because I'm having like anxiety issues or I just don't feel great, what I try and do is make that super clear to my junior, Catherine, so that she kind of knows and feels like it's totally fine, to be honest, and that she can also do the same. Something I also struggle with a lot is like black and white thinking, and I assume that everybody works identically to me. So what I try and kind of do is have an open conversation with other people about the best ways that they work. Otherwise I'll be like, what's that person that done that thing? Like, that's not what I do. Yeah, and I just find that like I try and cross the line that a lot of people say don't do and become unprofessional. I just feel like it creates a better relationship with Catherine, and also like I just think it's nice, and it's the best way to be transparent and kind of make a nice connection with someone who really trusts you. I try and encourage really regular breaks and paid time off, and make sure that I'm actually taking them as well, because I'm the worst at it. And then, yeah, I think Zoe touched on this, but I'm the same, that if I'm putting any meetings in, like I need a super clear agenda all the time. Otherwise, I'll just like panic before a meeting and I'll not understand what the point of it is, and I'll just be really stressed. So I try and make sure that whenever I do a meeting, I do a super clear agenda. And I try and do the what, why, and when principle, which is really helpful for kind of neurodiverse people, in that if you're going to assign a task, I try and do the what. So what are you actually wanting to deliver? Why? Like, what is the point of it? What will it achieve? Because sometimes if I just get given a task and I don't understand the context, then that really blocks me from being able to do it. And then when, so like when the deadline is, so I've got a very clear order of what needs to be done. And then I absolutely hate when you get those meeting requests that are like, can we just hop on a quick call? Because I feel like they just fill you with complete blind panic. So I've tried to like stamp those out in my work. And if I'm going to do that, I always put like something good, or like nothing bad, just to prove that it's not as anxiety inducing as it would be for me. And I've just got one more slide, and I just included some tools that I find really helpful in my work for kind of managing my neurodiversity and working the best that I can. So I use Pomo Focus a lot, which is a Pomodoro timer where you work in 25-minute blocks. Otherwise, like I said, I will work for like hours and hours, or I'll just get distracted within like minutes. So I find that really helpful. I also use Asana for kind of project management. Otherwise, I literally forget everything. Like my brain is a sieve quite a lot. Or I remember really, really like pointless details that aren't that relevant to the overall goal of something. And I use Notion for the same, where I basically just like brain dump everything in there as soon as I think of it. And I feel like it helps me kind of untangle my brain sometimes, because it can be a bit of a mess in there. As well as Clockify, which is like a free extension for Google or Windows or Mac. You can put it on Google, where you can kind of time track yourself, not for any reason other than that I know for a fact that I won't work in like normal blocks. So it helps me where I like pop in and out of a project, or stops me from looking up and being like, oh, I've been working at this for like 8 hours with no break. And I use Freedom as well, which is great, which kind of blocks any outside distractions while you're working. It's a free app that you can add to Google Chrome, and it'll stop you from accessing anything apart from the work that you're meant to be doing. And then the last one is Manual of Me, which I really like to use with Catherine and the rest of my team. Basically, create a document with some questions that kind of encourages you to share how you'll work best with each other. So the questions might be like, I prefer a morning meeting or an evening meeting. I prefer to talk through a brief, or I prefer it in writing. And it kind of gives you an idea of someone else's working styles. You can really kind of understand each other. And then along with that, like, it sounds a little bit silly, but I set loads of reminder alarms for myself, because my executive functioning sometimes just isn't great. Like, they'll be like, set a reminder to eat, set a reminder to kind of shower if it's like early morning, set a reminder to go for a walk. Otherwise, I just will not do it. And then I do the same with kind of calendar blocking, which I found really helpful. In the morning, I will plan out my entire day and block off hours in the calendar for stuff that I know I need to do, so that I'm like hyper focused in that minute. And also that means I can put in stuff like lunch and like get up and move around and that kind of stuff. And I found that just like all of these things kind of work together to help me be a bit more functional. because I do really struggle with kind of day-to-day organisation and being on it with this kind of stuff. So I think using a little bit of tech is always super helpful. And yeah, that's I think there's like one slide left, which is just like a final little bit of advice that I really liked, which is a little bit childish, but I thought it was really nice. But yeah, that's basically kind of my journey in my career and how I found little ways to kind of make it work for me and kind of how I got to the point where I am. So I hope that was a little bit helpful. And that's it, I think, from me. Oh, you're on mute, Yomi.
My tech.
You're muted. We are not hearing you.
Am I back? Can everybody
Okay, cool.
can everybody hear and see me? Thank you so much, Marley.
Yes.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you, Danche, and thank you, Zoe, for your presentations. They were definitely very insightful and very helpful, especially for me who just recently got diagnosed and I'm just somewhere like, how do I even navigate it? So thank you so much. And I'm sure this was very helpful for the attendees. So I think we have a few questions in the comments, and please feel free to turn on your cameras if you have any question. So someone asks, speakers with lived experiences, what advice will you give those in the process of getting a diagnosis as an adult? I feel that the process can be draining.
Yeah, I'll go first. Definitely draining. Can't say I know this from experience because fortunately for me, I got diagnosed quite young, but from people around me, it is draining. One thing I would say is continue at it, as tiring, as stressful as it can be. When you get that diagnosis, it does lift that weight off your shoulders. And I would say, give yourself time to accept it. It's not going to be all roses and daisies. It's difficult when you first get told, like, even if you've been waiting for it, when it sits in, it's like, this is truly it. So I would say keep going with it and keep pushing for that diagnosis, because it will benefit you and it will open doors to different stuff like access to work and the whole range of different things where you can seek advice. So that's what I would say to that.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. It's definitely a very long, stressful process. Like, I was diagnosed as an adult, but it took a very, very long time of like back and forth with the NHS and getting kind of the wrong diagnosis and getting kind of not taken very seriously, which I think is kind of the struggle with being a woman as well in the medical system. You kind of tend to get kind of pushed to the side. But yeah, I would say it is kind of a disheartening process, which is really frustrating. But I think the relief that you get when you can finally answer those questions about yourself makes it really worth it. So it is something worth doing, especially like Zoe said, because it does open doors for kind of support and stuff for you. But also I would say, like, depending on the reasons that you want to get diagnosed, like if you already know there's no shame in a self-diagnosis, like if you want to just confirm it, then I think great. But if you already kind of know and you're just like rubber stamping it, like there's nothing wrong with you knowing and that being something that you kind of are comfortable with.
Thank you very much, Marley and Zoe. Danche, did you want to go? Danche.
Oh, no, sorry, I was just answering direct messages. Sorry.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you so much, Marley and Zoe. I think in my experience with the UK in particular, the NHS can be very long and tardy. If you can afford it, going private really helps. Or if you work for an organization that has the neurodiversity stamp on its website, this is like an inside hack, then you can ask your organization to support you with getting a diagnosis, and they're legally expected to at least, get you reasonable adjustments, and through that you can kind of work towards getting a diagnosis. So I think that's one way. Did anybody else have any questions?
I have a question.
Okay.
Okay. I don't have my camera on because I'm in my bed, but I will ask my question anyway. Thank you guys for the presentation. Very good. My name is Chime. I'm based in Nigeria. My question is this. The first one is I'm trying to understand the difference between neurodiversity and other types of mental health conditions. So in this conversation, we've had ADHD mentioned, dyslexia, we've had autism, etc. But I'm kind of curious, does that tag of neurodiversity extend to other mental health conditions, obsessive compulsive disorder, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder? How should we think about those things as part of the conversation around neurodiversity, or not part of that conversation? Since there were specific examples mentioned in this discussion. And then the second is I'm trying to understand, and this kind of goes to Martin's presentation, I'm trying to understand neurodiversity in the context of whether one should view it as an illness or not. Now, I know this is kind of a conversation in general around mental health conditions, but I'm looking at the definition, for instance, that was given in the clinical psychologist when she was talking about ADHD. And she defined it, ADHD, as negative impacts in occupational, social, and other types of settings. And I'm thinking about that definition, and I'm thinking about it in the context of whether we should be thinking about neurodiversity as an illness or not. How is it that we should not think about it as an illness if a definition like ADHD is defined as negatively impacting you across various sectors, if that makes sense? So yeah, would love to hear people's thoughts, and I hope those questions made sense.
Yeah.
Wow. Great questions for sure, but wow. Where do I even start with that? Anyone else want to go first?
Yeah, I want to go because it was partially addressed towards my presentation. Thank you, Chime, if I pronounce your name correctly. Sorry if I'm not. Wonderful questions. Can I just briefly address the first question that was from Shaika? I think it can be draining process, of course, but the point is not to look at it as an obstacle. Look at it as a challenge. You are not alone. You have your support group. You have professionals here for you. The main thing is to understand that you are not alone, and it's not something that that can, I don't know, make a big negative impact in your life. If that's a fair answer. So the next question on Chime. Neurodiversity is not an illness. Neurodiversity is not a I don't know. It's not a disorder. Neurodiversity is a concept that addresses the diversities, the variations in the human brain and cognition that people can have and have. So if you see ADHD as a clinical disorder, as a condition, of course it affects many fields in our lives, such as the academia, society, and so on, friendship and relationships and so on. First, we need to define what is normal and what is outside of the normality, what is typical and what is outside the typical. We have those broad clinical definitions, but the neurodiversity movement claims that this is not everything. There is more to it. that, for example, how can we say that if Zoe, sorry for taking your example, but because you mentioned it before, she's wearing noise cancelling headphones in her work. She's doing her routines every time precisely. She's eating lunch at the same time. She's doing her chores. She's doing her work. How can we say that Zoe has some impairment, some disability, some disadvantage over something that is commonly referred as typical, because people are not wearing a noise cancellation headphones, because people are eating lunch in different times, today at 1 p.m., tomorrow at 3 p.m. So there are things that if we see the clinical diagnosis for a I don't know, some condition like schizophrenia or some major